All righty, welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. According to medical experts, AI should not be used for medical advice. One man ended up poisoned after taking diet advice from ChatGPT. Our next guest has more. And joining us now here on The Factor Uncensored, we have with us Dr. Danish Ali from Archpoint Pain Institute. Dr. Ali, AI, artificial intelligence, is invading our lives, and there are many different platforms out there like ChatGPT and Meta and many others, I think Gemini. But we have an individual who used one of those platforms to try and lose weight. What's our understanding what happened to this man, or try to get healthier, and it put him in a pickle?
Yeah, Isaiah. No, that's a good point, and it is true, Isaiah. What we're seeing is, AI and Chat GPT and all these others that are coming out. May be good to give you some recipes and tell you about, what sort of, photos would look good with, your clothes and whatnot. But we definitely want to take the medical advice that they give, or ChatGPT and other AI platforms give, with a grain of salt, right? No pun intended, because the story that we're about to talk about is a gentleman who had high blood pressure, and he looked up how to lower his blood pressure. And one of the alternatives was to lower your salt intake. And ChatGPT suggested sodium bromide. And this individual started using sodium bromide, and started replacing it. And before we knew it, a few weeks later, Isaiah, this guy was hallucinating. He was delirious, not feeling like himself. And he went to the hospital and found that he had bromide poisoning. That is actually a very dangerous compound that can happen when bromide poisons your internal organs and builds up in your system. Thankfully, he's okay. He got IV fluids, he got a bunch of medications, and he's doing fine. But this case shows us that we need to be very cautious when we attempt to get medical advice from one of these AI platforms. And it can be very dangerous indeed.
Absolutely. Now, we have seen this in the past, especially when we were all introduced to Google, and people would uh, use Google to get medical advice, to figure out if they're sick or not, and they would just drive themselves crazy, because every symptom, every ailment you had, Google would essentially say you're dying. Your life is over.
That's
You
correct.
know, and you can tell, just like a kid, you can tell someone, "Hey, don't do this with it," and that's exactly what they will do with it. So, how can you convince people that AI is not the avenue to monitor, to make you a healthy person, to check on your blood pressure, to help you lose weight? How do you send that message home and remind them of this guy whose life was in jeopardy and health was in jeopardy?
Yeah, Isaiah. I think that AI, Chat GPT, these sorts of platforms are good ways to enlighten yourself, get some information or even some background, and it can kind of give it to you in a more layman terms that you may be able to understand. But take that knowledge and go discuss it with another professional in that field, right? So, for example, it may be a physician in the medical field, or it's a car issue. Maybe your car's not starting, and you put some of the things that happened, and it shoots out some places where you can start. But you still ultimately want to take it to the mechanic for him to diagnose it and figure out what's going on. But at least you've got some questions, and you've got a good platform where you can have a in-line discussion with that professional about what are avenues and what are things that can be done. So you can use that information, but don't use that as the sole information and just run with it like this gentleman did, where he started consuming bromide, which, by the way, bromide's been prohibited for years in the States here. And so he obtained it. And we very rarely see now the bromide poisoning. But again, just a classic example of being very careful in taking that information that you get and taking it with a grain of salt, where you can then, talk to your professional after you've, explored whatever it is that it's saying.
All righty, make sure you don't go anywhere. We'll continue this discussion after the break. Welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. A cautionary warning out tonight when it comes to using AI for medical advice. It also brings up the question of the medical industry can be more accessible to patients. That's the question. Let's get back to our discussion. And I think a lot of people use AI as a mechanism also to try and save money. So they won't have to pay for that doctor's visit. So they won't have to pay for that car repair. When it comes to the medical profession and the healthcare industry, how can you guys, and obviously I'm putting you on the spot here, but how can you guys make yourself much more accessible to the patients out there so they won't turn to something like this? They want a quick answer. What can people do, or what can you guys do in your industry to be more accessible to patients out there? I'll hear some people say, I call my doctor, I have a 2-3 week wait, or I can't get them on the phone.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a very valid point, and those are things that we're working on in the medical field in the background here. One of the options is to, discuss online with us. So some folks and some physicians have online portals where you can communicate and chat with the doctors. Again, there's not a short answer to that, Isaiah. There's not something that, it's not like you can just go to the doctor and say, hey, this is the one thing, and, look at it remotely. It's like me fixing a car without the car even being here, right?
And you guys have a long list of patients to see each day.
For sure, Isaiah. So I think it's really trying to find the time, ask questions and get some information in the background, which is totally fine, and then discuss it with your medical professional. And then together as a team, y'all can figure out what the next step would be, rather than just trying to treat it on your own. Again, folks, physicians and medical professionals have gone through years of training, years of education to get to where they're at. And so they can give you that information by putting it all in together for you.
All right, but just don't use AI as your doctor.
That's
You can get
correct.
some preliminary information from there, but don't follow the instructions and then be caught taking bromide, which is, one Google search could have told you that's not good for you. I don't care what Chat GPT said. All
That's
right,
it.
Dr. Ganesh Ali, you can find you on social media as well. And of course, Arch Point Pain Institute. Always good to see you here on The Factor Uncensored. We appreciate your time, sir.